We need to understand something we call JSX or TSX, which is now templating in React. And what JSX stands for, it's JavaScript and XML. So they allows you to write HTML in React, and it makes easier to write and add some HTML in React. In most cases, you'll find like the JSX or TSX will allow you to write the HTML element in JavaScript and place them in the DOM without now the DOM function, which is the create element or append child method that we are using in the DOM manipulation some weeks before. One thing to understand or to put key on is JSX is not HTML. So JSX is written on camel case because it's JavaScript or TSX or TypeScript. It's not like HTML attributes. Things like how we are giving a button a class of btn or button. But in JSX, we use now the camel case. And this is something you need to put key on because the camel case is now the official or way you write JSX in React. So if it's class, now we use now the class name instead of what? The class. And you need to follow the camel case naming convention. So that class name can work. So how do we use the JSX? So we use something we call curly braces, which is just a window to the JavaScript or the TypeScript world. So JSX is a special way of writing HTML, or we can say it's just an HTML with superpowers. That's what we can say, the JSX. So it's possible now to use JS inside it with help of these curly braces. So the curly braces is what now differentiates between React and now the dynamic JavaScript that we have. So the curly braces is where you write your React code, but on HTML and JavaScript, that is where you get that dynamic code. React, not React, but JavaScript. And a simple syntax of how we write JSX. So we have said we must use the curly braces when writing your React or JSX. So the curly braces indicates now it's a JSX code or a React code. So for instance, we have a name which is storing this value, Dennis Washira. Then the element can be now a H1. Then arrow now use the what? The curly braces to pass what? This name, like the value we have here. So this will be now hello Dennis Washira. Same case, you can have something like this. So a div. So that div, it's also displaying a JSX value, which is now the variable name planet, which is equals to world. So you can pass it there and just say hello world because use of this JSX, which is curly braces that helps write values in this React way, which is what we are calling HTML with superpowers. Like this data can be dynamic. Then the next thing, it's not all about data variables. We can also set some dynamic attributes. Things like image, it has some attributes like source. So remember in normal HTML, we were to write the actual path or directory where that image is located in, but you can store that in a variable and pass it as a value, as a dynamic value in your image source attribute using what? The curly braces. So that is what we call the dynamic attribute. You set a variable, then you give it the actual directory where your image is located. Then you pass it as a dynamic attribute in your image tag, which is the HTML tag. Same case with styling. You can pass dynamic styles in your HTML divs or elements. So we can have a background of red. So the style will be now the first curly braces, which indicates it's a JSX. Then the second curly braces is now the objects that we use to style our application with the style.css. So the two must be included. First one to indicate is a JSX code, then the second indicates it's an object of the styling, the way we style normal CSS. Then same case, it's not all about function, not all about styles attributed variables. We can also have embedding some JS function in a JSX. So we can have a function which formats the name, which has a property like user. Then the user returns what? The user dot first name, then we append or we concatenate with the plus operator, we place a space between, then another plus operator, we concatenate it with that. This user is an object, that is why we are using user dot first name. So whenever we are calling this function, we need to pass a what? An object which has the first name. So our element can be now our h1, then we call hello, then the curly braces to indicate it's a JSX, then we call our function, which is this format name, then we pass our argument, which is this object, the user. With that now, we can call this function dynamically in our HTML. Remember whatever we said, JSX helps you embed what in the first PPT here. So it allows us to write what? HTML element in JavaScript and place them in the DOM without what? Create element function or append what? Child method. Whatever in short is just an HTML with superpowers. Just remember that. Then we talked about the functions. And the next thing before we go on how the function is being returned. So there is something error that comes when you nest two components at the same time, but React expects to return one thing at a time. Like for instance, this function is returning two components at the same time. So this might bring errors in your application, and that is why we have a solution for this. I will be able to see how you can be able to solve this. So before we continue from there, let me go back to the VS Code, and we try now the templating, which is using the JSX or the TSX, the curly braces. So I'll just delete everything we have here. We scaffold our application again, just for recap. So Control or delete. So once that is deleted, we said the command to scaffold our project is pnpm create what? Vit. So Vit, we need to call the name, so to give it a name. So the current directory is not empty, please choose. So we can remove everything in the existing. And once we remove the package name is that, then it's a React project with TypeScript, and I don't want the roll down Vite, and I want to install and start the application. So that is done, and our application is running on port what? 5173. So let's open that and see, yeah, this one. Let's put it side by side and see what is happening in our application. So let me just hit some terminals that are not in use that way. So we have our application there and we have our VS Code there. So where to write our code, it's in this app.tsx file. So I can just remove everything from the return function, then remove what is not in use like this. Let me just turn off this boy here. So whatever I'm not using, let me just remove it from there. So the next now is now to write our own code. The first thing you need to understand is the normal function, but the normal function is returning something. So whatever you are returning now, we are returning a JSX or a React component. That is whatever is happening here. So whatever I want to return here, maybe an H1 and see how we can be able to work along or to have the templating. So after the function name, this is where we define our variables. So define variables. So I can have an example of some variables here, which is now the JSX with the variable, something like that. So variables, and then how do we define variables with in JavaScript or TypeScript? Use the which keyword? We can use const, we can use let, and we can use what? Python. Which are the three keywords that we define variables in JS and TS? Hmm. Okay, so let me just use const. So the const, I can give it a variable name like a student name. Then this student's name, I want to assign it a value like future React developers, something like that. I want to have another variable like the current year. So the current year, we can use the inbuilt date function or the class in the node. So we can use the new keyword to instantiate the new date in our function or the function that is in node. Then we want to get the get full here. So we have this function on that class, get full here. That will return what? The full here, which is a number. Then we can have also another variable here, like welcome message. So the welcome message, it's like this. We can have like welcome to your first what? React adventure, something like that. So welcome to your first React adventure, something like that. And you can also have another variable. So this variable const maybe excitement level. So excitement level, which is something like an emoji. So we can have an emoji there just to indicate the excitement level, something like that. So with that now, we have defined our variables. So where to return this is where we have the return keyword, where we are returning now the JSX or the React component. So how can we do that? So we can have an H1 here. So H1, so the H1 can be something like a emoji there, just to celebrate what you are running. Then hello React. wow, can be something like that. So with that, that is whatever is being displayed in our what? In our application. But we want to use the templating, the curly braces to display whatever we have here. So just below this H1, we can have now that the curly braces. So these curly braces, um, we can have it something like this. Let me have this comment here. So we are just the TSX or the JSX variable. So we want to use the curly braces to put now JavaScript in what? HTML. This is our HTML, but we want to put JavaScript in this HTML. How can we do that? So we can have a div class here. So this, how can we have that div? So a div with class name, like we said now, instead of normal class one in normal HTML and CSS, we use now the class name in React. So the class name can be canned, and this canned, we can have something to display our elements. So we can have an H2. So the H2 can be now whatever we want to display here. JSX templating, something like that, maybe templating magic, because that is what we'll be using. So the next now is the p tag. So the p tag, I don't want to pass a static value. I want to display whatever we have this, the welcome message. So we want to welcome to your first what? React adventure. So here we need to add now the curly braces. What indicates now is a JSX or it's a React what? Syntax. So in this now, I can pass what? The welcome message, which is that. The next thing is now, let's remove these comments. I don't know why we have some issues with the comment. So unreachable code detected, so intrinsic and the rest. So let's see what we have in the errors here. So templating unexpected token. So we have something that is, if we open the developer to inspect on the console log, so failed to re-render. Let me refresh this. So we still that have an issue with unexpected token. Let's see where is that token coming from. So these are curly braces. These are just a comment message. So this comment, so the error I was talking about. JSX expression must have a what? One parent what? Element. So how can we solve this? We talked about on this presentation. So we have this issue of JSX can only return one thing. So you have two components that are being returned. You need to wrap them with something we call what? The div, that to indicate you are returning this as a div element. But in most cases, you find it as an empty fragment. So this is good, but the better way to return one component, it's now using the fragment. So you use this fragment without anything inside, so that you can be able to nest multiple components in your what? In your React. So that is something I was to show about you. So in our application, we need now to wrap our application the same way. So this now should go below where we have the divs. With that now, our issue is being resolved. So we have now the this fragment, we want to render one component instead of this. This is an element, this is an element. So in this element, we have some elements. So there are two elements, and you cannot return two elements in a React component. So we need to comment this that way so that we can have now our application running smoothly. So we have hello React, the H1, which is this JSX templating, the whatever you are doing here. Then the welcome message, which is a variable we have here. That is what we are displaying with these curly braces. The next thing maybe is to display the student name, this one, hello, this one, developer. So you can have that below here, another p tag. So this p tag, we want to display a static message like hello there, then comma. So we include the curly braces to indicate we want to pass as JSX code, which is now the student name. That is what you want to pass here, the student name. Then we can have exclamation outside and maybe also pass another curly braces to pass the excitement level, this one. So that is what I want to pass the excitement level. And with that now, the message will be hello there, future React developers, which is now with this excitement level. Then whatever is remaining, maybe you can display the year, the current year. So just below here, we want to have another p tag. So this p tag, we want to indicate the date or the year we are. So it's what? Current year. So we use the curly braces, then we pass the current year variable. So it's current year, and you are learning what? React, something like that. So with that, the date function with getFull here returns the year that we are, and you are running what? React. So same case, we can do some mathematics inside the JSX. We can do some math in the JSX. So how can we do this math? Something like this, a p tag. So this p tag, you want to do something like 2 plus 2. So that is just the text, but if we pass it on the JSX or the curly braces, we can use now 2 plus 2 and get what? The addition. So this can be equals this. So can be 2 plus 2 is this. This is what now we are talking about, like yes, maybe we can do math in JSX code. That is what is happening here. So in JSX, you pass a 2 or the variables, we can get the mathematics, either the addition, subtraction, and what? Multiplication and the rest. Any mathematic operation you may think of, you can do them in a JSX code. So that is how we do templating in JSX. So we use the curly braces to pass what? Those values which are dynamic in our what? HTML code. So whatever is happening is just a function, normal function, it can be arrow function. This function, we have some JSX variables or normal variables. Then on the return, you want to make sure you're only returning one thing, which is now this fragment. But on this fragment, we have an element, which is an H1. We have a div, which has this card. With that now, we have that. So the next thing is something to do with the components and what? The properties. So the components, if I come back on the application or the presentation, so you are done with this, solving the issue of this error. So every time you see this error, just know you are returning more than one thing in the return keyword of a JSX component or a React component. Then to resolve that, use the div, but in some cases you will find like you are returning div. So you want to make sure the first fragment should be this empty fragment. Just make sure you are returning what? That. Then the use of curly braces will be every using curly braces to do that. So the curly braces, even if you are returning an object as a in your JSX, you will need to double and the curly braces. So the first curly braces will indicate is the JSX code. Then the second curly braces, it will indicate is an object. Remember, an object, it should be have the curly braces. That is why you need to pass the double curly braces to indicate a JSX and also an object at the same time. So same case when writing the styles. So if you are styling an ordered list, so the unordered list is a style. So the first object or the curly braces indicates it's a JSX code. Then the second indicates is now the what? The styling, which is the CSS. The way now we do the normal CSS, like a key or the property value, the property of that style, then the value of that. So the next thing is now to ask ourselves, what are the properties or the props, and how can we pass props in a component? And also, what is a component? In a function like this, so we have a function like app, which is also a component. In most cases, you'll be finding yourself calling them component instead of functions. So this one and the same thing, but it's called a component because it's returning a JSX code. But a normal function will just return a variable. So this component is returning another what? Component, which is what? Greetings. But we need to pass some text on this component or the properties on this component. So how do you pass this data? So the first thing is to make a prop and give it a what? A variable. So we have this component, like you define that function. So the function greetings expect somewhat properties. Then you want to return that properties. So the property like an object. So use now dot text to get the key of the property you are passing on that what function or the component. When now you render that component, wherever you are rendering that component, you want to pass now the properties, which is text and the value of that what? Properties or props. So this is the function or the component definition. Then whenever you are calling that component, which is essentially like a normal function, you need to pass now the properties. And that prop is of this key name text. So you need now to pass the text and assign it what? That value. So in the prop, you can pass anything. It's not all about the value. You can pass other component as props also. So if you have a parent component, you can pass a component as a child in that what? Parent component. So that is whatever is happening in this explanation here. So you have a parent component, and on that component, you are returning props, which is now the children of that component. This happens especially when creating a dashboard where you have a side nav and some components. So you know how a dashboard looks like. So we have this dashboard here. So this dashboard has a side nav here, which has some component here, and a nav bar here, which has some values or navs there, and maybe the profile there. So in this component, we have this now component here, which is child of the bigger or the component that holding the what? The old pinch. So you may want to use now this prop and return these children as there. So you want to return these children's component as a prop. So you'll be passing them in this parent component and render those children's component dynamically according to what we have on this side now. So we can have maybe analytics component. We can have maybe orders component here. We can have maybe meals if you are building a restaurant management system. Maybe what else? Payment. What else can we have? Maybe all the users. If this is a dashboard for the admin. So whenever you'll be clicking this, you'll be rendering a different children component on this without re-rendering the old page. So this component, this child component, you pass them as a prop in the parent what component. You see that later. So whatever is happening there, it's the same. So you pass any property, whether the children or the text or anything. And the next thing is how just to explain on how that data flows from top to bottom. So the data especially flows from the parent component to the children, but some events need to be listened to the child component going back to where? To the parent component. We will be discussing that later, but I want us we play along with our components and our properties and see how we can work along with them and how they help us. But before that, let's know what is React component. So React component are just building blocks of your application. So it can be a header component. It can be a content what? Component. It can be a footer what? Component. And it's not all about the header content and anything. A button in React, that's a component itself. An input, that's a component itself. The entire web page, it's a what? Where is it? So the entire page is also a what? A component. These are all visible parts of your application. So that is how you should view your application in terms of whether it's built in React. So anything you are seeing there, either it's a card, that's a component, a form, that's a component, button, a component, input, a component, and they are just function returning a JSX what? Code. That is whatever is happening. So we use mostly those components now are written either in normal function or the arrow function. So you write a function like this, and if you want to use that function, remember you must export that what? Function. So it's just a function that is returning a JSX, whatever you have here. So it's returning a JSX. If it's arrow function, the same, the function name, make sure to indicate it's an arrow function with this equals and greater than. Then you want to return that function. Then if you want to export that function as a default, we use the export keyword. Then the same case, how to write function in one line. So it is the same here. We use the export default keyword instead of using it or coming here and exporting that function. So you can use it directly, that function. But if you want to write it in separate, that is what? So you define the function, then you export what? That function, which is essentially now in React are components, not functions. But they are just function, but in React we call them components. Then we can use this component where you want. And then once we export, the next thing is of course to import those functions or the component. So we use now the default export, which now does not have the curly braces. So the curly braces is for the export default. So that is something you should take care when importing and exporting the components. Know when to use export defaults, know when to use the named what? Export. So let me Let's go back to the VS Code and maybe try to write 2 or 3 components before um, the end of this class. So I want to have some components in my application. So this was just templating, but I want to have components which are just functions. So how can we write them? So I want to have a component at the top, which is like maybe a movie card. So just below my function at the top here, I want to have a function here, which is a component. So this function can be function. So function can be a movie card. Remember, it's a component, so movie card. So this movie card, we want to pass some properties, which is an object, and that we'll pass it there, and that in the function definition, we want to return what? The JSX. So the return, then on this, we want to return div. So this div is what we want to return. And at that div, we want to return some variables. So we want to have an h3. We also need to have maybe a p tag and another p tag. That is what I want to pass or to render this or this function or the component. It's what I want it to render. So the p tag. So this function, I want to pass the properties, which is now the props, whatever you'll be hearing me calling them props. So you want to pass the props. On these props, I want to pass it as an object. So how do we define an object? We use the what? The curly braces. And remember, we are in TypeScript world. We need to type what? This object. So we use the curly braces there or the full colon, then we open the curly braces again to type our props. So in the props, I want maybe to pass the title. Then I want to pass the year, maybe that what year that movie was released, and maybe an emoji to show some reaction on that movie we are trying to display. Then remember we need to type. So a title should be of data type what? Of type what? String. What about here? What data type? Peter, range. What data type should we pass in the year?
Hello,
Yes.
number.
Okay. What about emoji?
String.
Okay, a string. So once we pass that, we want now to use these props. So all the structured elements are unused. So we want to pass them or return them in our what? In our component. So here at the H3, we want to use the curly braces. I want to pass an emoji, the one we are passing as a property here. The one you can see now the error has gone because we have used that property or prop. Then we want to pass the title. So the title also to be of the emoji and the title of that movie. So below the other p tag, we want to set or to display the release what? Here. So the released in, we call the year. So let's do some string or JSX templating there. Then we call the year. Then after it was released, we can show the years that has passed when that year or when that movie was released. How can we do that? So we can do something like that. We do some JSX templating. Then which year are we? 2025. We said we can do some mathematics. So 2025 minus what? The year we are passing here to show how many years have passed since that movie was released. So we can pass year there. And after that, we say years ago, something like that. So that is what we want to return. Then something else, we may want to style this div. So how can we style that? So this div, we just call the style keyword. Then the first curly braces shows is the JSX attribute. Then we need also now the second curly braces to indicate now the styling properties or how we write our CSS. So on this, we can now write the normal CSS. So the margin can be maybe 10 pixels. So that is what I want to pass there, 10 pixels. We comma, we can have banding of 15 pixels also. Then what else can we pass? Maybe color of the text. So color can be this color black 00. And so that is now our component. So this component, it has some props. So the props is now the title, the year, and the emoji of this type. So whenever we are calling this card now, or the movie card, we need to pass what? We need to pass what? The properties that the function or the component is expecting. So just below our first string templating here, we can have it just below here. So this is where you want to call the component with the properties. So we want to call the movie component. So we can have that emoji of showing video. Let me see whether we can have that. Maybe something like this. I want to show component with the props. So comment this. Then below there, we can have a div. So this div, we want to show now the movie collection on this div. So we can have maybe a class name we can use to style this div. So inside our div, you want to have an h2. So the h2, we want to show the movie collection. So the movie collection. So the movie collection with the props example. So just below here in our HTML or the browser, that is where you want to showcase those movies. So what can we do? We call the component now, the one we have written. This is the movie card. And how do we render that component? We use now the tags. We call that movie card. Then we close that component. It's just a self closing what? Component. That is how you call the component. Yes, it's a function, but remember normal function, we call the function name, then we pass what? The parentheses. But this is not now a function, it's a component. And how do you render that component? In React, we use this, the fragment to show it's a self-closing what? Component. But if you over to that component, it will tell you like it's missing some what? Properties, which is like what? The title, the year, and the what? The emoji. So this is a function we have, which is a JSX element. That is whatever is indicating here, the return type of that function. which is now the components. So how do we pass those component properties? So after calling your function or the component, you want to pass now inside the fragments. So, and the first thing is what? The title. So the title, you want to give it a variable like what? Maybe the matrix, so one movie. Then once you pass that, you want to pass the year. So the year can be a JSX component string also, maybe 1999, something like that. Then what emoji can we pass? I can pass this emoji to show the matrix here. We can have that component here. So we have called the movie card, which has the title as the first properties or prop. Then the year, we are passing it as a variable there, which is 999. Then the emoji, which is a string. So in our movie collection, we are getting what? That movie card being displayed, but it's in dark. So we need to change the color of our text just to make sure it's visible. So what we can do on that element, maybe instead of changing the color of the text, we can add the background color. So the background color to be now white. So we can have hashtag FOFFFO, something like that. So with that now, we have what? Our component, which is movie count, which is being rendered, and we passing the properties, which is the matrix. It is in what? 1999, and which 26 years what? Ago. So we are doing some mathematics here. The year we are passing, then we might minus the current year. So the next thing, this we said about component what? Reusability. That is what the main purpose of React. So we can reuse this component again. So just below we have here, we can call the component again. So I can copy this and paste it again and have the next what? Component are the same as this. And instead of now passing the same value, I can pass a different what? Value, which is the title, can be the Toy Story, another movie. And this movie maybe was released in 1995, and maybe the emoji of this can be this teddy bear, something like that. So we have now two components being reused by passing what? Different what? Props on that what? On that component where we are returning here. So that is how you call it. If I have another, want to pass another component, we can pass it there. Then the movie name can be something like maybe the Spider-Man. So the Spider-Man was released in 2002. And maybe the emoji for that, we can have the spider to indicate the spider. So with that now, we have the three components, but it's just one component which we have reused by rendering it 3 times with different what? With different what? With different what? What are we passing here?
Components.
Huh?
Components.
What are we passing in this function or component?
Oh, props.
Yes, so you are passing props. This is not a normal function. So normal function would say these are arguments or parameters. But since this is a component, we are passing what? Props or properties. That is the difference between a function and a component. This is a React component, because it's returning some HTML-like code instead of normal return type, the way we know function returns something, either a value, maybe something else, or null or undefined. But in component, it returns what? Some JSX what? Like HTML, like what? Component. That is why we are calling it a component, not a React function, but it's written in the form of function because we want to use the return keyword. We return that. Then once we do that, we render that component. So we are rendering the process of converting now the React component to a what? An HTML or DOM element, whatever we are doing. So we are not using now the create element, append, child function that we used to have in what? In the DOM manipulation classes. So that is what we are eliminating here. So we can have another component that may be showing our hobbies. So that is the first component. We can have another component here that shows our hobbies. Component showing our hobbies. So this component, it has some array properties there. So function, maybe hobby list. So this hobby list is a function. It's a component, so it does not have any props. So I just want to be like that. Then inside that, we want to have some hobbies. So this hobbies is of this what? Array type. So I want to pass my hobbies there as quick as possible. So my hobbies, I love gaming, reading, music, cycling, and cooking. So the next thing is now to return a JSX what? So we want to return that JSX code or the React component, which is now a div. So this div can be of this style here. So let me return a style. So this should be normal brackets, not curly braces, that way. So this div of style, this we can have maybe margin. I don't want to keep much on styling first because the main purpose of this is to learn the components and properties. So 20 pixels left and right, 0 top and bottom. Then we can have an H1 or H3 to indicate the popular hobbies. Something like that. So below there, we want to have now the unordered list to display what? Our hobbies. So our hobbies are in array form. And remember, if we have array form, we can use method like .map, .length, .findIndex, .what. So we can use to render the each hobby we have in this what? Array. So how can we use that? So we can have now our JSX templating, which is the curly braces. So inside our curly braces, we can call our hobbies. So we call our hobbies because it's a dynamic data. That is why we need to make sure we are on JSX curly braces syntax. Then the hobbies, remember it's an array. So if I use dot, I can be able to perform functions or operation we can do in this what? Array, but I want to call the map function. So the map function in array is a function that accepts up to 3 arguments. So the map method calls the callback function one time for each element in array. So it just calls that whatever you are passing. So this map I want it to return each hobby. So we have hobbies. So we want to return one element, which is now hobby. And this hobby, we want now to pass it in this callback function that way. And what we want to return in this, we want to return now a list that is indicating what? That which is li, and we want to display now that in this text, which is that hobby there. With JSX, we want to return that hobby. So we are returning each hobby in what? In this list. So with that now, with this hobby list, we can call this function or the component, or we can render this component and show our what? Our hobbies using the help of the JSX syntax. We call the hobby, then we map. We return each hobby and place it in a what? In a list HTML what? Element. That is whatever, instead of just passing whatever you are passing, or the first is something like maybe now gaming, we can have the second one, which is what? Reading. That is whatever we are eliminating. We don't want this repetitive work of redoing something similar. So we want just to use the map function, then we return each hobby there. So how can we render this? So just below our div here, we can call that below again to show our hobbies. So just below here, we want to render list. So we want to render that list. How can we do that? Let me have them in div also. So we have a div. So this div is of class name this. Class name maybe a card. So inside that div, we want to call what? Our hobby. So we start with the opening our fragment, then we call the component name, which is hobby list. Then we close that component. With that, we have rendered our application or the component, and below our what? The Spider-Man or the components you have rendered, we should be able to see our hobby in list format. So because it's unordered, that is why we are having the dots. If you want them to be ordered, so we use OL, right? So that is whatever we have done here. So we have used the map function in array, which is now this array we have here to map each. But if you look keenly, sometimes we have issues with let me just show something else here. Just a minute. So whatever you have done in rendering this, it's what we call rendering a list in a component. So we want, maybe when building our application, we want to render some products like the t-shirts and the rest. So we use the map function, then that component, we are creating just one component and using it to render what? Something like this. So why we use list in React? So the main reason we use list in React is to efficiently render multiple components by using the same what? Component instance, multiple what? Time. So we can keep our code what? Which is dry, like do not repeat yourself. That is whatever you're trying to eliminate. So you don't want to have multiple components that are doing the same thing, of which you can define that component once and reuse it. Then when rendering a component, you must have something we call the key props or the key in that component. So we don't want that situation where, so this whatever we have done, we have an item component. Maybe you have passed an item or you can define something there, then we want to return that item. So when calling that component, we are mapping, then return that component. So that component can be another component or an HTML component, whatever we have done here. For us, we are returning a list HTML component, but we can also render another component as a while mapping our element. So while doing that, we want to make sure each component that is being rendered it has a unique what? Key. Like if it's the list item, we want to make sure you can pass what? The key to that element to avoid the issue of these who is who. So you are rendering the same items, like two Spider-Man, but to uniquely identify the two Spider-Man because they have the same uniform, they have the same values. We want to pass the key or a unique identifier to do what? To differentiate the two Spider-Man we have or the two components that we are rendering together. So what can we do? So we can give that key as a unique number on each component or to be a unique what? String. So for instance, in our application here, whatever we are building here, so we have rendered this, but each list does not have a what? An ID. But remember, that ID is very much important because we said React uses what? The deferring algorithm to check some updates. So if this list, the first list, second list, third list, fourth list, and fifth list have the same ID, the React will not be able to see which component was changed and update that in the what? The actual DOM. So it uses now the uniqueness or a unique identifier of each component so that it can be able to patch each what? Component that was changed. And if you inspect this, check on the console, we have this error now that was a change. Each child in React DOM client at least should have a what? A unique what? Key. So each list we are listing here should have a what? A key to identify them uniquely so that React can be able to use the virtual DOM to listen to any state change to each list. Sometimes you may want to only change a value in this, the last element. But since they do not have what? A unique identifier, React will be confused. And in most cases, you find now it will be accessing the whole component instead of the list component that is just being what? Done. So we need to fix this error of what? Each component or list should have a what? A key to identify it uniquely. So how can we do that? So while rendering our hobbies, we need to make sure we can pass what? We can pass what? The key. So how can we pass the key? So this is the list. Are you to get up to that point? So this list is now where we want to pass each unique what? Property. So what can we pass to differentiate to have the each list should have a unique identifier. So what can we pass here? So we want to pass the key. So we need to use the key one. So what can we pass as our key to uniquely identify each list component? What can we use? First of all, this is an array, right? And array uses what? Index. So we can pass index to be our what? Our key. So we can pass the index that way. but we need also now to render that also in our map. So by doing this, so we pass index, comma. So that is the two things we want to pass, then the index. So with that now, if we check on our application, inspect, the error is gone, but there are some pitfalls with using index when rendering what? Or uniquely identifying each list. So if you check on my presentation, something like, let me just check. So how do we do that? So understanding the key, that is whatever you are saying. So it's just a special string attribute that you pass to a component when they are created in a what? In a list. They play a crucial what? Role in the what? Reconciliation process that I talked about when the deferring process or the algorithm is checking the changes. So the key is used in the reconciliation process, which is the algorithm React uses to check the difference of one tree with another one to determine which part needs what? An update. So if you're having a list like numbers, so you want to render that numbers, so you pass this number, so the list, then the key. So can be the number dot string. So because each number has a different, like we do not have a duplicate like 1 1. So we can use it the actual value to be the key instead of what? The index. So the pitfall for the index. So let's go next here. So like this, that is whatever we said. So we can pass the index as our what? The key. So the div we are trying to create. So each div will be created with the index as the unique identifier of that div. We are mapping what? So to avoid the issue of whatever I was saying in the browser or the console you inspect. So you'll be having this issue. Each sound in a list should have a unique, which is the key. So check this. So make sure you document this error to make sure you can fix it whenever you see, and mostly occurs when rendering or mapping some component in React. Then we have some common mistakes when using key in list. And one common mistake when using key in list is using the item index as the key, whatever you have done. So yeah, it can work in some cases, but it's not recommended. Why? If the order of items can change, this can negatively impact what? The performance and may cause issues with the what? The component states. So it's always advisable not to use index because that order can change. And you know, while storing that the initial index, then the order changes, it will have the issues on how the React virtual DOM is checking the differences about what part was updated. So another common mistake is now not providing that key. That is also another common mistake. So if the key is not provided, the React will default to use the indexes as a key, and this now will cause the same issue as whatever we have discussed in the top. So you need to check on that when rendering what? A component. So what can we do to solve that? So instead of now passing the index as a what? The key, you can use the actual value to be the key now because each OB has a different what is unique to the other one. So there is no point where gaming can be what? Reading. Reading can be music, but the index of this can change. So that is what we want to eliminate. So how can we do that? So we have said we cannot, we don't want to use index. So the key should now be what? Here. Instead of hobby or instead of index should be what? Now the actual hobby, whatever you are having there, and remove this index. So with that now, each list is uniquely identified by the actual hobby. And if we check on our template, we do not have that error of each this should be what? Having a unique key identifier. So key to thing to note, remember about the common mistake I've said, is to use index as the key, which can lead to issues of how the React checks the state of your application. Another common mistake is forgetting to provide a key, which now will come back to the React where it uses index as a default key. Then it will result now to the issue of number one. So just make sure you check on that. So that is rendering a list in our application. And the next thing now we want to do, and it's maybe to modularize this and make sure instead of having this card, we can separate them and place them in another folder and call them in our what? In our app.tsx. Remember having an application that has over 30 components. The app.tsx TSX file will be much fragmented with a lot of what? Components. So we want a situation where we can place them in another what? Folder and call them in our what? Application. Remember app.tsx is our what? Our entry point. So we need to make sure everything must come to to app.tsx. So what can we do? So under the source folder, that is where we create a new folder called components. So on the components now, that is where now we will move these components and place them in our component folder, then call them in our what? Application. So I want to use different component names here instead of the one we are having here. So I can just remove this. Let me just remove everything in our return. So to have that, then maybe whatever we have here to leave our app very clean app.tsx file. So on this return list, so I can just remove it from there. Same case with movie card. So to leave our application app.tsx file clean. So under the component, we can create some components. So the first component I want to create, it may be maybe a superhero component. So in our components, let me create a new file here. I can call it maybe superhero component. So the superhero component of now we need to save our files as dot what? tsx. So in this component, we want to have a function. So the same component the way we are defining those components. So the most cases you will find them with this the function name and the file name are the same. So that is the easiest way to write this. So function name, which is function superhero, and this function expects some props. So I need to pass that props as a object. Then we need to open the curly braces to write our function or the component. Then we need to return something. So when we want to return a div. So this div, I want to have it that way and maybe to have some style. So I want to call the style key1, then the styles. So background color, so can be that. And background color can be maybe the color we can pass it as a prop from somewhere. So let me just leave it empty for now. Then maybe padding of 15 pixels, border, and the rest. So let me just have those texts pasted here. So we want to pass padding, margin, border radius, and color and text align. And in our div, so where we have our div here, inside the div where we write our content now, we want to return an HTML, an H3. So this H3 maybe can be that person. Then the JSX curly braces to indicate I want to write a JSX syntax. Then I want to pass a dynamic value there. Then the next thing, maybe a p tag, another p tag. Then I want to pass now the power of this superhero work we are defining here. So the power can be now another JSX value there. Then the third is maybe inch. So I can just pass the curly braces, which is the JSX syntax. Then we want to pass the age of that person, which is age, and we can use some values there to pass. So this value can be optional, but I'll show how to pass this. So on this function, you want to pass properties. So you want to pass name. You want to pass what? Maybe the power of that person. And what? Maybe color. So we can also pass color as a prop, the one we want to use it in our background. Then what else? Age. So this age, remember it's an object, so we can type it here. Is that the way we type our object? Hello? Are you together? So we want to type this. So what is the type of a name? String, right? Then what about power? A string also, right? What about color? String. What about age? Age can be what? Number. But remember, we talked about the interfaces in TypeScript. We need to use that instead of having this long typing here. So we can have an interface here. So call it interface, maybe super hero props. So that is how we call it, superhero props. So inside our superhero, we want to copy this, all of our types, cut, then paste in our interface there. So let's put it just right after the other one. That way. So instead of now typing here the object, we can call now the interface, which is super what? Hero interface. With that, now we have typed our function with this interface, the one you are passing here. So in the background, I want to pass this color we are passing as a prop. So I want to pass it color there. Then in the H1, I want to pass the what? The name of this superhero. So name, which is this. Then the next thing, the power, is the power of this superhero. We want to pass it here, here. Then on the age, I want to make it an optional value. We use what? Question mark to indicate it's a what? Optional. So if we pass that value, we can use it. If we don't pass it, it's okay also. We'll go ahead and render our what? Our component. So how can we use that age if it's optional? So we want to display age if it's there, and if it's not there, we use this double quotation or the double symbols, which is the ampersand. So the ampersand, we want to check, do we have age? Yes, then display that age. So we can have now a p tag. So the p tag this way. So we want now to pass the inch, which is, we open the curly braces to indicate the JSX, and we pass the inch there. So whatever is happening here, we are checking. We have age, yes, then display a p tag. If we do not have, do not display these curly braces. That is whatever happening with this ampersand. So we are checking because these are an optional value. So you want to display when it's available, but if it's not available, do not display this. So with that now, remember the component is under the component folder. We need to find a way to bring it here. So we use what? The export and import what? The export and import what? Module feature. So we can export this under default here. So export default what? The name of that superhero. So it's superhero. Superhero that way. So with this now function, we can be able to render it inside here. So how can we render it? Since we have exported, if I open the curly braces to import that component and call the actual name, the component name, which is super what? Hero. If it's well exported, I should be able to see it in my IntelliSense. This one. Where is it coming from? The component, then the function name, this one, the file name. So if I use now tab, then close that component. So the component is imported here. That is it's export default. That is why we don't have the curly braces. Then the component expects somewhat. The component expects somewhat. Hello? What do we say a component that has this? What are these? What are these? Props. So whenever you render that component, you need to pass what? Those props in that component while rendering. And the first prop is what? The name. So we can have now name as our first prop. And what the name of the first superhero we want to pass? Maybe it's Spider-Man. That way. Then the next is what? What is the next property we are passing? It's power. Remember the function, this one. So the superhero, we are passing the name, the power, the color, and what? The text or inch. Sorry. So you want to pass the power. So which power of Superman owns? It's web what? So that is the power that a Superman, super Spider-Man. Then we want to pass now the color of that background. So maybe can be red, so something like that. Then you can be able to see the component that we are rendering here. It's already in red. Then the age of this super Spider-Man, the superhero Spider-Man. So we want to also to pass age, which is what? Maybe 23. So with that now, we have our Spider-Man, power is web thingy, then the age. We want to pass another superhero. We just call the same component, paste it there down, then change the values. So the second superhero can be Black Panther. So the Black Panther, which power does Black Panther have? Is vibranium what? I think suit, eh? We can have something power like this, vibranium suit, and maybe the color of that can be something to grayish, something like that. Then the age can be 35. So that is what we have here, the two components, but we have modularized to make sure we have the component in a external folder there or a separate folder. Then we import that component here. Make sure to use the fragment so that you can be able to return one thing in that app. So that is how you display. The next thing, maybe we can display maybe a pizza card. So a pizza card before we complete this. So we can have another component here very quickly. So pizza card.tsx. So on TSX, we said should have the function name as same as what? The file name. But we have an extension to bootstrap that function or the component. So if I come to this component and say RFACE, so React arrow function with export. So if I do that, I should be able to get that component auto completed for me. If I want the other one, so I can use R React function component without the exports. So you get the normal function, which is now the export default with this. So with that, with help of this extension called, I think ES7, let me see whether I can get that extension. Yes, this ES7 and React Redux, React Native. So it's just JavaScript and Redux snippets for ES6, ES7 with Babel. So it's auto complete some of those components by typing the what? Those component. So in most cases, you'll be seeing now writing me React arrow function with export that way. And with that, it gives you the same function that we end here with the export default. Then inside, I can now type whatever I want. So I want to return a div. On this div, instead of just pizza card, I want to return an H1, excuse me. So in the div, I want to style that div first. So here, by now we should now be aware of whatever we are doing. Then on the div itself, I want to return an H3 and a P tag. So I want to return an H3, a P tag, and a P tag. So the H3, I want to return some props. So on this, I need to pass those props here. The name, maybe the topping of that pizza, toppings. So comma, then the price of that pizza. Then is it a vegetarian? So I can pass is vegetarian as a boolean there. Then the size of that pizza. Then remember, use interface to type your component. So interface, and this is the pizza props. I can call it that way. So the pizza props name should be a string. Then we can have toppings as an array. Remember, these has several toppings, so we can have them as an array of string. Then the price, there is vegetarian, which is Boolean, the size. So the size, we can use the union type on TS to indicate can be small, can be medium, or can be what? Large. So what we want to do, we have the H1, we are displaying the name of that pizza and the size of that pizza, then the price, then is it vegetarian? So this is now the use of the question mark that I said about. It's a short form for if statement. So let me have this explanation of the ternary operator for conditional rendering. So this ternary operator, the question mark, is a unique JavaScript operator that is used as a shortcut for if-else statements. So it is the only JavaScript that takes three operands. So the operands are the values, but the operator is now the symbol. So the operand is the the condition, the compiler or the text, and another text. So you are checking with the condition. So if this is true, return this. Else, return what? This. That is what is happening. So how can you understand this? You can have something like this. So in conditional rendering can be achieved using the JS operator, like the ternary operator. So you can have a variable like is logged in. So is logged in can be a Boolean, false or what? True. Then you can use the first one that we talked about. If it's logged in is true, you want to display this. That is what is happening. So the same case here. So this is like an if statement without the else part. Remember the loop, the conditional structures we learned about. We have if statement, then if else statement, then we have if, else if, else if, else statement. So the one with the two ampersand, it is the if statement without what? The else part. But if you want the else part, we can use now the ternary operator, which is the question mark. So the question mark, it acts now as a what? The if statement. It has the if statement, the first condition, and the second part if this is false. So if it's logged in, if it's true or false. So the first is always the true part. So if it's logged in, if this is true, we will show this message like welcome back. If it's false, we want to do what? Login. So that is the purpose of this ternary operator, and you'll be seeing me every using this ternary operator to check some condition, which is only that requires two parts, either true or what? False, for checking the two statements. So best practices and mistake to avoid. So first thing is, while nesting ternary operators can be very useful, so we can have so many nesting of them, but they can make your code harder to read and understand. So do not overuse them. I'm saying use them when you only have like two parts, like where you have the first code and the second code, where it may be can true or false. Then avoid what? Deep nesting. So if you find yourself nesting more than two ternary operators, consider using what? The if statement. Now the actual one, because you can use the else if another, or the switch what? Statement. Then use parentheses for clarity. So if you do not use the nested ternary, so you can use the parentheses to clearly indicate the order of that operations. So you see this when be working with that ternary operator later. Then keep it simple. If your conditional expression are more complex, consider breaking them into downward, into variables and functions for readability. So that is something you should consider when using this ternary operator to conditionally render your component in React. So that is what I want to use now, this ternary operator to render whatever I'm doing here. So I'm checking, is it a vegetarian? So is it true? We return what? Vegetarian. Is it any other what? Maybe non-vegetarian, we want to return this. So we are checking like if vegetarian is true, we return what? Vegetarian. If vegetarian is false, we are returning what? Yes. So we have eliminated now the if statement and replace it with what? With this ternary operator. Then after displaying that, we want to display what? The toppings. So the toppings, we can display them here. So just make sure we want to type this with our pizza prop to avoid issues of typing here. So the topping is the one that we haven't used in this component. So just below here, you want to have a div. So this div, maybe we want to have a strong HTML element to indicate the toppings. So these toppings, we want to now render those toppings under what? An ordered list. So we want an ordered list, and this ordered list we want to open now the curly braces because it's a JSX code. Let me have them on the next line this way. So in these curly braces, we want to call our toppings, which is array, and we call the map function. Then the map function, we want to pass the each topping in our callback function, this one. Then we want now to list each topping in this list. So we pass now each topping in this using the JSX, which is topping there. Remember the issue of key. So each list should have a what? A key. So the key we want to have is now the actual topping. We don't want to use the index, but we want to use the topping as a what? As our key in each list that is being rendered. So our pizza card is created and it's exported. So we can be able to use it in our app.tsx now. So just below our app.tsx, let's call our pizza. So the pizza component, pizza card. Make sure it's imported here. So it's pizza card imported from this. Then it should be inside our fragment to avoid issues. Yes, that way. So the pizza card expects some properties, which is the name, toppings, price, and what. So this pizza card, let's pass those element or the properties here. The first is the name. So which name should we give to this pizza? Do we know the names of pizzas? I know men don't take pizzas. That can be an issue. So Joy, give us one name for pizza you know. You don't know also. So don't take pizza also. Okay, so let's call it maybe margherita. We have this pizza called margherita. Then this pizza has some toppings. So these toppings can be, it's an array, remember? So we need to indicate it's an array by having that square bracket. And also it should pass as a what? The JSX. So we need those JSX curly braces there. So the toppings of this margherita pizza, it should have a tomato sauce. Then I can have this something we call basil. These are just apps for adding some flavor in this pizza. It's a string, so let's make sure we indicate with string, also with string here. Then another topping can have is mozzarella. It's another topping we have in this pizza. So mozzarella, something like that. Then the next thing to pass in this pizza card is what? Price is vegetarian and what? The size. So just below there, the price maybe can be in dollars, 12 point maybe 00, 12.00, it gets $12, something like that. And of course, this is a vegetarian because we do not have any meat. So is vegetarian, we can pass it as a JSX there and score it true. Then comma, or not comma, but the size now. So the size can be medium, small, or what? With that. So the error is gone. And if we check down here, we have a what? Our pizza component, but it has some issues with the styling. So let's see what we can change in our this component, the styling. So we have the background to be white, so the color can be now dark, something like this. hash type 00. And with that, we have now the first what? Pizza with these values. So what we can call this again the pizza in our application. So we copy this and paste, render that pizza again there. Then instead of now passing the same values, we want to pass a meat lover pizza. So we can call it meat lover. Then the toppings for this pizza can be pepperoni. So something like this, pepperoni, then can have some sausages because it's a meat lover pizza, then can have some ham and maybe some bacon. Then this should be more expensive than a vegetarian one. Then it's not a vegetarian, so should be what? False. And can be the size of lunch, something like that. And with that, now we have the second what? We have the second pizza in our application. This is now the component. So this is one component. This is one component. This is one component. This is one component. But it's one component that we have reused to display two meats, two pizzas. Same case with the first Spider hero component. It's only one component, but we are passing it with the different, like the color, the name, the power of that superhero, and the age. Same case with what? This one. So that marks the second of our the end of our second class.